Hey, want a cookie? Oh, I know you just ate, so you're craving something a little sweet. Besides, one cookie isn't gonna kill you. How about half? Just a bite? Bite it. Bite it. Bite it.
Food noise isn't fair, but Mochi Health is. Your affordable GLP-1 source that puts you on a path to successful weight loss by quieting food noise.
Bite it.
Shh. Learn more at joinmochi.com. Mochi members have access to licensed physicians and nutritionists. Results may vary.
This episode of Voices for Justice is sponsored by Shopify. Starting a business is filled with a lot of what-ifs. What if I fail? What if nobody listens to the podcast? What if nobody cares? It can definitely be hard to get over that doubt and uncertainty, but making that leap was one of the best things I've ever done, and it's great to know that I'm not alone with a business partner like Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Heinz and Mattel to brands just getting started. And I'm telling you, their tools really do feel like you have a business partner. They have hundreds of ready-to-use templates to help build a beautiful online store that matches your brand. You can also get the word out like you have an entire marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And if you get stuck, Shopify is always there to help with their award-winning 24/7 customer service. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/justice. Go to shopify.com/justice. That's shopify.com/justice. Voices for Justice is a podcast that uses adult language and discusses sensitive and potentially triggering topics, including violence, abuse, and murder. This podcast may not be appropriate for younger audiences. All parties are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Some names have been changed or omitted per their request or for safety purposes. Listener discretion is advised. My name is Sarah Turney, and this is Voices for Justice. In this episode of Voices for Justice, I explore the psychology behind Alissa's case, and I speak with Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott from the LA Not So Confidential podcast. They will each speak to their own experience and background, but Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott are both very experienced psychologists that have worked with families, law enforcement, and more. I asked them to come on the podcast to speak about Alissa and the case in a very general sense. Essentially, I wanted a better understanding of what Alissa was going through and how her very unique upbringing and relationship with our father could have impacted her life. That being said, I want to add a large disclaimer here. We are not in any way trying to diagnose my father with anything. Without having treated him directly, neither doctor is able to ethically or correctly diagnose my father with anything. And to be honest, that isn't something I would feel comfortable putting on this podcast, even if they were. We are simply having a conversation and referencing their knowledge on general psychology and how it is applicable to Alissa's case and how we grew up. Also, we ended up talking for a long time because there were just so many things I wanted to touch on. So this episode is being released in 2 parts. But without further introduction, here is the first half of my conversation with Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott from the LA Not So Confidential podcast. Thank you guys so much for being here. I just want to start with your background. Let's start with you, Dr. Shiloh.
Thank you, Sarah. It's our pleasure to be here, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk with your audience and give some input. So thanks for asking about our background, because I think that would be important to them. So I'm a forensic psychologist in Los Angeles, and I have worked in a couple different areas under that umbrella, primarily for about, going on 14 years. I always say a decade, but I have to admit it's been longer than that. I worked with prisoners coming out of incarceration and specialized in high-risk sex offenders. So all the way from contact offenses with victims in real life to internet facilitated sexual offenses. And with that population, I did psychological assessment and treatment, both group therapy and individual therapy. And then I also do that in my private practice now a little bit as well with what we call pretrial offenders. So these are individuals who realize they're being investigated and want to get into therapy before they're going to prison. So it's a little bit, as you can imagine, sort of managing anxiety and depression and the fears that are there, as well as wrapping their mind around what prison's going to be like and prepping them for that. And then a good deal of them, especially those that come to me of their own volition, definitely want to start working on why they got in trouble and want to start figuring that out before they even go to prison. So that's been the majority of my psychological career. I now work in law enforcement psychology. So I am a psychologist that works directly with and for a police department where officers are my clients. So I might see them just for any sort of given life issue that they want to come to therapy for, or if it's after some sort of critical incident that they've been involved in as part of the job. And that is full circle for me because before I was a psychologist, I was a police officer for 7 years with a local police department here in Southern California. And it was a fantastic experience and definitely has set me up for everything that I am doing now. So I feel like I have worked 3 different careers in one lifetime already. But yeah, that's a bit about me.
Dr. Scott, would you like to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I started out in this career after a long time in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles and various areas. The last couple of areas I worked in were casting and producing documentaries and talent management. And I thought that I was going to be going back to school to become a marriage and family therapist, which is a master's level clinician providing services to like families, individuals, couples. And I got about halfway through my program and I realized I was just so fascinated and I wanted a really deeper and wider breadth of education. So I got into a doctoral program that is a clinical psychology program. So I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist as well as being a licensed psychologist. And although Dr. Shiloh and I have basically the same basic foundational education in our doctoral work, my emphasis was on clinical work with sort of like a minor in family forensics. So I have specialized training in being an expert witness and doing custody evaluations and, really kind of doing deep dives into family dynamics. Right out of school, I went to work in the state prison system out here. Did that for several years. Then I worked in the jail system here in Southern California. And now I partner with a law enforcement entity. As a partner, I go out on a daily basis with a law enforcement officer or detective in order to help people that are at risk of becoming a danger to themselves in the community. And we try and reconnect them to services. And that's sort of like the small description version. We do a lot more than that. We also educate law enforcement officers on how to use de-escalation techniques. We also train people on sort of hostage negotiation. That's not really my specialty, although we've both Shiloh and I have been trained in that. And Shiloh and I met years ago at our internship working with sex offenders, and we became fast friends, and our offices are just a few blocks from each other. And 3 years ago, we were walking home from coffee or walking back from coffee, and Shiloh said, "Oh, we should do a podcast." And here we are.
It's crazy how things like that work. And of course, all of us met through the podcasting community as well. It's a great, really cool community of so many people that care. I'm just honestly so grateful.
We have met the best people. We talk about that all the time. Just the quality of individuals that we get to meet and work with has been so just, I don't know where else I could have gotten that, but it's been really rewarding.
And just surprising, like just the caliber of people, the caliber of talent, and just nice people, which is such so unexpected. It's been great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just so grateful to have you guys on because when it comes to, the psychology of all of this, I'm just completely out of my realm of experience. And I don't want to comment on anything if I don't have, firsthand experience or knowledge on that specific topic, if you will. So I'm going to hand it over to you guys because you have created a wonderful list of topics that you think are extremely applicable to speak on in terms of Alyssa's situation. This episode of Voices for Justice is brought to you by Quince. I've been trying to be more intentional about what I wear each day. I'm leaning into pieces that feel effortless, comfortable, and still put together. And Quince has been my go-to. The fabrics feel elevated, the fits are flattering, and everything just works without overthinking it. They use premium materials like 100% European linen, organic cotton, and ultra-soft denim. And the best part? Everything is priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. They work directly with ethical factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're paying for quality and craftsmanship, not brand markup. I recently just ordered their tiered linen dress, of course in black. I wanted to pair it with one of my favorite pairs of brown wedges. The problem was, I didn't have a brown purse. So I got that from Quince too. It's one of my favorite outfits. It's easy, effortless, and feels amazing, especially as we're getting a little bit warmer here in Phoenix. Refresh your everyday with luxury you'll actually use. Head to quince.com/justice for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/justice for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/justice.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why customers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started collaborating with you and just bouncing ideas back and forth, it sort of, when we started talking, 8 months ago. And so since then, it seems like the focus has changed because, the entire situation has shifted for you. And as a result, I think that sort of informs how we'll be talking about what we're talking about. So what I came up with, Dr. Shiloh, was some interesting things that just in listening to your podcast, listening to the interviews and your back and forth, the things that sort of jumped out for me, and especially from my particular training previous to becoming a psychologist as a marriage and family therapist, one of the things that really jumped out to me is this concept of parenting styles. So, in the world of parent education and family education, we look at basically that there are overall 4 broad, distinct categories of parenting styles. We have authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and uninvolved or disengaged. And really, only one of them is really great, and that is authoritative. And authoritative is sort of like the best kind of combination of qualities that a parent can bring to the situation to the best of their ability. And one of the things in listening to so much of your recordings is I see these markers for authoritarian parenting. And when we're talking about authoritarian versus authoritative, we're talking about parents who have really excessively rigid rules and excessive punishments. And one of the major roles that parents are supposed to play in a child's life is to socialize that child to the values and the expectations of their culture. And people who are authoritarians and are very rigid about rules in the house and the rules of life, quote unquote, basically don't really do a great job of parenting their child in that way. And so authoritative, like we were saying before, is considered to be optimal. And then authoritarian and permissive or uninvolved, disengaged are all problematic. So parents with an authoritarian style tend to have really high expectations of their children, but they don't provide a lot in the way of feedback and the necessary nurturance of that child in order to develop their adult skills. Mistakes tend to be punished really pretty harshly. Corporal punishment, yelling are really commonly seen in this style. And, a lot of the research shows that parents who work from this paradigm are status oriented and obedience oriented, and they expect their orders to be obeyed completely and without any explanation. So punishment is used rather than discipline. The parents are generally not willing or they're not able to explain the reasoning behind their rules. Or if they do try and explain, the rules don't make any sense or they're arbitrary and they change all the time. So authoritarian parents tend to see themselves as like these knights in shining armor. They're champions of morality. But what we find out is that kids that grow up in that kind of environment end up becoming less evolved when it comes to like self-regulation and making moral and ethical judgments later on in life. So it's not the greatest bag for someone who grows up in that environment. So, let's talk about this. Is there anything good about this type of parenting? So I'm going to try and find something good out of this particular example. Kids raised by authoritarian parents can be goal-driven because they're used to basically abiding by really strict instructions and rules. So look, there's a benefit to that. Kids can figure out, oh, these are the steps that have to be taken in order for me to accomplish this goal. So that's one sort of positive we can find. Another one is that authoritarian parents really place a strong emphasis on safety. So and usually physical safety. So they try and minimize the types of behaviors for a kid that might be risky. But the problem is down the line is that, growing up as a kid, you're supposed to go through these developmental stages where you take risks and you experience the consequences of your actions. And if an authoritarian parent is hovering around all the time with these threats of punishment, then a kid doesn't really have the opportunity to explore in that area. So the other thing that could be possibly thought of as positive is that, kids of authoritarian parents, they are absolutely the best behaved in the room. Like they really, really are noticed to be by other people of like, oh, your kid behaves really well, because there's a really clear line about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And they're also usually like really highly attuned to what the negative consequences are going to be from any kind of wrong behavior. So they avoid stepping out of line. The problem is that kids are kids and they need to explore with being their own person, which means they're going to come in conflict with that authoritarian parent. So now let's talk, those were the sort of possible pros. The cons are really significant. So all the studies show that kids that grow up in that kind of environment have lower self-esteem. They depend on others to reflect back to them their confidence, and they sometimes struggle in social situations or new environments. They can be emotionally withdrawn. They're not comfortable expressing their emotions because their emotions are generally invalidated by their parents. And then sometimes they can become themselves overly dependent on rules, rigid rules. And the world doesn't work that way. The world is all about shades of gray and having to be flexible. And that can be difficult for a child that grows up in that environment. And then one of the other really significant things that can happen is that the kids, especially into the teen years, can get so exhausted by constantly trying to find a way to adhere to all these rules. They basically just throw in the towel and they become rebels. And they rebel in behavioral ways or emotional ways, which then only cause more conflict with the parent. So that's a mouthful about authoritarian parenting. Do you feel like I've just dumped on you right now?
A little bit, but that's okay. Because while you're speaking, I'm thinking of so many things in my head, of course, and so many examples of Alissa, because I feel like she was she was kind of both, right? There was, this aspect of her that I think really wanted to please our father and kind of, I guess, put him at ease and get him off of her back. But then, yeah, there are so many instances in which Alissa kind of acted out, said inappropriate things towards teachers, calling them names in response to, them not being nice to her or whatever. Just things that I think are pretty normal teenage things, at least from my point of view. But one thing that really struck me while you were speaking is that I feel like, in my opinion, our father was both ways, right? He was very controlling over Alissa, but then when it came to me, he was completely the opposite. So at the
Yeah.
same exact time, he
Yeah.
was doing two different parenting styles. So I would love to get either of your opinions on that, because that's what confuses me. It's not as if he was just one way. He was acting in two separate different ways to Alissa and I both at the same exact time.
Which is even more damaging, because if two children, two siblings are treated exactly the same way, at least there's an ability for them both to have this shared experience where, you as a sister can turn to her and you can both go, wow, this is a really crappy situation, but at least I'm not going crazy. Like there is something that we have a commonality here. You can validate my experience. I can validate your experience. But that's also, that was just the tip of the iceberg that Shiloh and I were bringing up as far as issues, because what you're saying is exactly what we're going to talk about next, and why you guys might have been treated so differently. So
Before you go into that, Scott,
Yeah.
I wanted to, go back even with the positives or the good outcomes that you mentioned, how incredibly confusing it could still be in a child, because like you said, with these strict rules that there is no answer behind it. It's just because I said so or because I'm the parent. So there's no development of critical thinking for this child or explanation, like let's sit down and talk about it and why I have these rules for you. It's just very black and white. So you can see how that then could develop how that child becomes when they grow up and how they think about the world and how they start taking everything in. And it's so damaging when you are essentially forming someone's thinking patterns in an errored way right off the bat. Because, we at first you don't think like, oh, am I going crazy? But you just think, okay, this is the way it is. This is how I have to put up with it, especially thinking your parents are all knowing and unconditional, right? We all would love to think that they mean well and they're doing their best. And that could just be terribly conflicting.
Right. I think you hit on something so important, is that it's so intrinsic to the individual's ability to develop critical thinking skills so that they can become a fully functioning, healthy adult. And what's crazy is that you can put a child in the worst parenting situation we can possibly imagine. And Shiloh and I have seen a lot of horrific parenting situations. And yet, because of, our sort of innate resiliency that's built into us so that we can survive as a species, people generally can get through it with, relatively little damage. But if it's chronic and severe of this treatment, what we're doing is setting up some real fallout later in life. And especially, Sarah, what you're talking about, that you're seeing both of these, because we're getting into the next concept, which is splitting. So sibling alienation, where you do exactly what you just described, which is one child becomes the target child, who is the one that's the problem maker. It's the one that's always messing up. It's whether or not they're actually rebelling, they are described as rebelling. They're described as the troublemaker, as the one who needs all this attention and constant maintenance, versus the one who is the golden child or the favored child. And, neither one of those positions is great. It's not great being the favored child, because when you're the favored child, you're not necessarily getting the correct containment and the correct positive or negative consequence and reinforcement that you need in order to develop into like the healthiest functioning adult that you can. So why would somebody do this? And it's really, why would a parent do this? It's simple and it's really sad, because by luring each child into what they think is the favored status, or over disciplining one child in comparison to the other, and then bad mouthing the targeted child to the golden child, the parent is able to secure at least one of the child's loyalty and then weaken the relationship between the two kids, because you're putting one kid in the position of, see, look at your sister. Your sister is just such a mess up. She can't do anything right. And you're fine. I don't have to worry about you. You go live your life. I've got to be over here constantly taking care. So what it does is it keeps the entire family dynamic off balance. You as siblings are never allowed to really figure out your own relationship. And one of the most heartbreaking things in listening to your sessions, your podcasts, and I've listened to most of them several times, if not a minimum of two, some of them three, is you give examples of these moments between you and Alissa that are really sweet and poignant, that in spite of this sort of separation that was instilled between the two of you, you really do come away with it from these moments that you had where there were really emotional, nurturing moments between the two of you. Does that feel familiar?
Absolutely. I mean, everything you say is just resonating with me so much. I mean, that's exactly how it was growing up, was that Alissa was, the bad one. She was the wild one. It was always, look at what she's doing now. Look at, she's screwing up now. My entire life I grew up listening to our father yell at Alissa. He would do things like put poster boards up on the walls with rules for her and say, well, you can't remember them, so I need to post them for you to see because you're just so stupid you can't remember them. While I was over here, kind of begging for attention, not having to go to school, doing whatever I want. I mean, when Alissa had to sign the contract stating that she had to, not be alone after 9 p.m. or whatever, I was out at my friend's house all the time, till 1, 2, 3 in the morning, just doing, not great things or whatever. So it's so crazy to see exactly how differently we were treated. And, to your point, yeah, Alissa was extremely nurturing. Despite her going through this experience with our father, she still picked up that maternal role for me. She still cared for me so much in ways that my father didn't even care for me. She was basically the only one cleaning the house, taught me how to do laundry, how to do dishes, how to really have all of those skills you would need to take care of yourself as a person. So while Alissa was doing all of this, and, in my opinion, our father was kind of pitting us against each other, it just caused so much contention between us because we both thought the other was, the favorite. But even despite that, Alissa was caring enough to realize that I needed that motherly role while she didn't even have one herself. So yeah, I think you hit the nail right on the head.
You know, part of this strategy is in any other situation, whether it was political or business, it's basically divide and conquer. So by keeping each child in a completely different paradigm of family experience, you're trying to keep both of the kids off balance. And even in spite of that, the resilience that both you and Alissa had was able to create a relationship that was somewhat healthy. I mean, one of the things that probably got pulled out of Sarah as a result of her experience was she was parentified in some ways. And it really feels like there was this role that was placed upon her that was more of a spouse role than a child role. And one of the things that we see in people that are chronic misogynists, men who really have this internalized misogyny, this really view of women as lesser or other beings, is that they have very rigid role expectations. And, you can really tell if a guy has a problem with women, because he can be on the surface can seem like the nicest guy in the world. But once he perceives a woman to step outside the role that she's supposed to inhabit, if his reaction is really huge, then you know where he's coming from. He's coming from like a really sort of twisted view of what a woman is supposed to be in the world and in relationships. So
Yeah. Sorry, I mean, just to stop you there, I saw that all throughout my father's relationships, even before I was born. From the second he divorced his first wife, his first thought was, where do I find another to take care of these kids? And he did. He remarried right away. And after actually, while our mother was dying, he expressed that he needed to find another woman to come take care of the kids and take care of the house. It wasn't until he had this girlfriend slash teacher of Alyssa's. When Alyssa said, I'm having sex with my dad, it wasn't until after that he completely stopped dating and completely stopped looking for that other person. So, yeah, I think, again, as always, you were hitting the nail right on the head.
And I think your audience, everyone knows that if you and Alyssa had been able to grow up even more together, that your bond would have just gotten closer and closer, as you gained your independence away from your father, that even with the situation, the dynamic that Dr. Scott's explaining, you guys would have risen above that and had such a wonderful relationship as adults.
Yeah. And I mean, what's heartbreaking about that I don't mention in the podcast is that before Alyssa was gone, that is when we really started getting closer. I wasn't going totally wild yet or whatever. But, like I mentioned, I was staying at friend's house. We were staying up late. We were, whatever, talking to older boys, all the things that I thought were so bad that Alyssa did, I was starting to try. And, it was developing into this different relationship. For example, it was a really big deal to me when she finally let me and my friends take the city bus and go to the mall with her and her friends. It was like the first time that I felt like I wasn't the annoying little sister. And we were finally bonding. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. I was seeing that. And that's, again, just one of the most heartbreaking aspects is if I just had one more year with Alyssa, I feel like maybe she would have been able to confide in me and what was going on. And we could have, I don't know, worked it out together and got out together.
Right. Yeah, I definitely feel like it was just a matter of just a little bit more time, and that would have made all the difference.
You know that thing where you get an amazing pair of shoes at a really great price and want to tell everyone about it? Yeah, so do we. Here at Designer Shoe Warehouse, we'll give you something to brag about, like the latest styles from brands you love, or the trends everyone's obsessing over, or shoes that make you feel like, well, you. So go ahead, show off a little. Find shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. Head to your DSW store or DSW.com today. DSW, let us surprise you.
This episode of Voices for Justice is sponsored by Chewy. If you have pets, you probably know about Chewy, and you also know that when they say that they have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy, they're not messing around. To keep them happy, Chewy has over 100,000 products from all the brands my pets love at prices I love. To keep them healthy, Chewy offers pet prescriptions, pet insurance, telehealth vet visits, and they're even rolling out vet clinics across the country. I've been shopping with them for a very long time. And in addition to the auto-ship feature that gets the dog's food to them every single month, I also love to experiment with different treats. But I'm a bit picky. For me, it has to be high quality with simple ingredients. I recently picked up treats from Shepherd Boy Farms that are 100% just chicken breast. Popcorn and Heber are already obsessed. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. And right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney. That's chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney to save $20 on your first order with free shipping. chewpanions.chewy.com/Sarah E. Turney. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details.
I was just going to say, I just think it's still going back to that resiliency with everything that the two of you experienced. What you have shared with us about your sister illustrates to me that she was able to overcome so much of it. The criticism and the comparison that you relate that your dad kind of put upon her. Why can't you be more like Sarah? Why can't you do this? Why are you so blank? Just sort of fill in the blank there, the way he criticized her. So many kids that are subject to that kind of behavior grow up to think of themselves as underachievers and outsiders, and they don't know how to celebrate their strengths because they've never really taken in any other voices except their parents' negative voices. And a lot of people in that situation can't even take it in from the outside, even though we know, like in the worst situation for a kid, if they have one or two positive mentor role models, a teacher, a boss, or even, a literary character or a TV character they like, that can be sort of the anchor for them. And I'm just amazed that, given the severity, I mean, it's so hard to wrap your mind around a teenage girl of her accomplishments and her abilities having to live in this environment with poster boards all around with these rules she has to follow. I mean, it's almost unimaginable.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was if I was working as a family therapist and a parent brought that in as like, oh yeah, this is the way I do things, I would be horrified. I really would.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that one of the reasons that we were so different too is, I was always told that I was smart and I could do anything I put my mind to. And I really, really believed that. And, despite, being somewhat neglected in my own opinion, that's really what drove me forward, is that I always had this confidence that I am smart. I can do whatever I put my mind to. And unfortunately, Alissa did not have that same mindset. I can tell you that. And it's heartbreaking.
Well, and that's the power of suggestion, if you will. And I think that's a good segue for me to dive into a really specific tactic that we see in some of these family dynamic type situations and others. They can be, we most often think of it in romantic situations, but it can be at work and politically. But that is gaslighting, which is a very trendy term these days. I think almost everyone is sort of using that in vernacular to talk about specific characteristics of abusive relationships. And so just a basic definition of gaslighting would be a manipulative psychological tactic that's employed to make someone doubt their sanity. And in this, the manipulator tries to get the target or the victim, however you want to say it, to question their reality and their perceptions, and are gradually sort of sowing these seeds of doubt for that person. So this comes from a movie in 1944, which was originally a play in 1938 called Gaslight. And it was about this abusive husband who tries to make his wife believe she's gone mad in order to send her off to an asylum. And he is doing things like dimming and brightening the gas lights in the home in order to manipulate her reality. So it is a form of psychological abuse. It can be used, like I said, in personal relationships, professional relationships. You could have a boss or a coworker that does this to you, or it can be more of like a public figure that's trying to manipulate us as a population or as voters, or however they can using media. But the common thread is that the victim ends up questioning everything about their own judgment. Can I trust the information that I'm taking in from my very own senses? Is there something wrong with me? Maybe I'm the crazy person here. Those are very common thoughts for someone who's being gaslighted. It tends to be a tool that narcissists love to use in their relationships. So just very quickly, narcissistic personality disorder is a pervasive mental health disorder that falls under the category of personality disorders. And there is as we're starting to find out with a lot of mental health issues, a biological basis perhaps, as well as a environmental impact in developing this sort of personality disorder with somebody. And they typically can't self-validate, so they're constantly seeking other people's approval or validation, or they just make up their own, that everything is so great and wonderful in order to believe their own lies to pump themselves up. And what stood out to me as we were talking about it just right now, Sarah, when you were talking about him wanting to replace wives essentially as soon as possible, is that narcissists tend to see people in their lives as merely characters. They're just characters in their own script. They really don't mean much to them. and therefore can be replaceable, especially if they're not meeting the needs of the narcissist, if they're no longer useful to that person. So that just kind of gave me chills when you were talking about him seeking that, it very quickly after each marriage or before, your mother had even passed away. So, but they can be compulsive liars. They want to keep up this facade to everyone else of this flawlessness. Oftentimes they will be really hesitant to want their partners or other family members to share maybe just regular bad things that are happening in the family or failures. They really want to keep that in-house. They don't want anyone to know that they're even experiencing just the little things you and I experience on a daily basis that aren't going well. And they also like to play the victim in order to evoke sympathy or some sort of pseudo love or support from others. So that's a narcissist. I didn't want to get too much into that, but narcissists love using gaslighting. And it's very effective if they can isolate the victim from others, because you can imagine if you start to isolate from other people and other thinkers, and you're only getting the information from that person and potentially an authoritarian parent, that is going to change your thinking into what they want it to be.
I mean, I was just going to jump in because you're hitting on all those points. One of the really tragic dynamics that can happen in that situation is when the target of gaslighting has been taught that they will get a better result by pleasing the person who is in the position of authority, then that only reinforces the authoritarian's ability to gaslight.
Absolutely.
Because then they don't want to disagree with the contradictions. Your emotions can be contradicted. Your what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, experience, all that can get wrapped into this denial of your experience, but you don't want to push against it because you still want what little love or reinforcement you can get from that person.
Yeah. So it becomes this vicious cycle of the victim being more and more reliant on the manipulator, which that's what they want. They want total, utter control over that individual. So a couple of things that jump out to me that are sort of sub-tactics of gaslighting is name calling. It usually doesn't start with this, but the easiest way to put someone down in kind of this last stitch effort is to call them things like stupid or dumb. And, not only does it seem like Alissa was hearing those things, but then that's being relayed to you and the family as well. Not only is Alissa having to see these poster boards, but you're walking by them every single day. So now it's reinforcing this this way of thinking to everybody who's in the household. So name calling is definitely one that we see. Shaming, so opening past wounds that might be hurtful to someone or telling them you should be ashamed of yourself for the way that they're thinking is a really good way to make somebody feel small and insignificant and like they don't matter. And then the last one I think is, another verbal one that is important is sort of these tasteless jokes, like very condescending at the expense of the victim. And it's a way to be abusive, verbally abusive, but then it comes off as like, oh, it's just in a joking manner. What's your problem? And if you're not laughing, then what's wrong with you? So it can constantly be flipped as to there's something wrong with you and why you're not getting what I'm saying. So all of those things.
That one
yeah.
I was just going to say that one in particular completely loops into what you're going to touch on a little bit later, which is the idea of grooming behaviors and sort of numbing a younger person to inappropriate comments about body image or sexuality.
Sure.
It's like taking a tasteless joke that has a sexual innuendo, should never be shared between a parent and a child. That's just like absolutely outside the borders of any kind of appropriate parenting.
Yeah, it can be a way of testing, is this person comfortable with this topic yet, that sort of thing. But all of this speaks to that triangulation that Dr. Scott was talking about. If you think of a triangle with, one family member, like the manipulator being at one point, the other person in the family that they're trying to get on their side at another point, and then the victim way out in sort of this, very pointy, almost, like a flag or a pennant. They're way out on their own, and here are the other two sort of together on the same team. That's, a lot of these tactics can be done to make that happen. So it's very tragic. I think most people, again, think of this in terms of a romantic relationship, that someone's trying to manipulate them or gaslight them into think they're crazy. But it's really hard to wrap your mind around a family member, especially a parent, doing this. Because again, you think they're supposed to unconditionally love me. They are right. Our parents can sort of do no wrong until we grow up and realize they're human too. But that can make it so hard to really see what's going on. And it's very hard to get out of. I mean, people need some specialized help because there's some really long-lasting effects to gaslighting.
What they did to your family, you're lucky to make it out alive.
Streaming on Peacock.
These men are going to come after me. Taking them out is my only chance.
Put a bullet in her head.
From the co-creator of Ozark.
Looks like a family was running drugs.
Execution-style killing, it's rare for the Keys. And it leads on who they might have been running for.
The cartel killed my family. I'm gonna kill them. All of them.
MIA. Streaming now. Only on Peacock.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you guys have brought up 30 plus years of memories for me during this conversation, because there's just so many examples I can point to that, mirror what you guys are saying. And, like, for example, the main reason I stayed home from school so often is because our father always said that he was going to give us away or run away. And I was genuinely afraid that one day he just wouldn't be there, which caused me, of course, to latch onto him even harder and created this relationship between him and I where I felt that we were best friends, which also meant I would tell on Alissa. I was that little sister that would tell on her every chance I got because I really thought that she was a danger to herself, like I had been led to believe, especially when I was younger, not so much towards the end before she left, but when I was younger, I was genuinely afraid for Alissa. And I thought that by telling on her, I was helping her in some way.
Sure, like helping rescue her or save her.
Exactly. Getting her back on track or whatever she would need in terms of that. I really thought I was helping. But there are some what I feel are inappropriate instances in which our father had people speak to us about our behavior. He had an aunt call us and she literally called and said, "You guys are going to kill your father. You're such bad children."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And another incident where his psychiatrist that we were close with, he had been going to him for, I think, 5+ years at that point. His psychiatrist brought me and Alissa in and said that basically the same thing, that you guys are being naughty and it's really affecting your father and it's hurting his feelings and you shouldn't do that. So it's crazy because it wasn't only him. It was as if he, I guess, talked people into believing this reality about us when we weren't doing much. We were maybe jumping off the roof onto the trampoline into the pool, but we weren't robbing banks or doing hard drugs or being that crazy. So I would honestly love to get your opinion on the fact that a psychiatrist sat us down and told us those things as children.
Let me pull my soapbox out.
I'm ready.
Get on top.
No, I got to tell you, and Shiloh knows this is something that, like, this gets me so hot. It is absolutely infuriating. First of all, we as mental health professionals, whether you're a psychiatrist who is a medical doctor with an emphasis on mental health treatment that, includes prescribing medications, but whether you're a social worker, MFT, LPCC, psychologist, psychiatrist, we have ethical and moral and legal duties to hold the framework of what we understand about an individual that's in our treatment, given the parameters of family and the sort of one-sided information we get. And if you start thinking that a client is coming to you and giving you the whole picture, then that's a big problem right there. So I'm just going to say very definitively, that psychiatrist really It doesn't matter that he was manipulated by your dad. It doesn't matter. What matters is that he didn't have the professional acumen and the professional judgment to discern at some point, like, I wonder if I should look for some inconsistencies in the story that this guy is bringing me. And then to cross a boundary even further, which was probably at the direction or request of your dad. Will you please talk to my daughters? I'm like, I'm falling apart. I'm dying. It's just killing me. Will you please? So what he was able to do was manipulate this person into his world and sort of create this false narrative, which is part of the gaslighting paradigm that Shiloh was talking about. So on one hand, like, the psychiatrist fell for it. On the other hand, he absolutely should not have. That's our job, not to fall for that stuff.
And it's not to say that we don't. I have family members come in and join sessions all the time. And I do that. And I tell them, I am not your psychologist. We do not have a therapeutic relationship. You are here to be an additional source of information for me. We call them collateral. A collateral source of information can be a person. And what I want in that session, whatever I'm working on with their, partner, parent, what have you, is to know from their eyes, how do you see your husband functioning at home? What are some of your concerns? Because they're with them in the home all the time. And so to get some more information, but I wouldn't be telling them to do anything. And so, I could even see in the situation you're explaining, the psychiatrist having you come in and saying, hey, how are things at home? Like, what's your perception? And it would help inform him to what your dad's story is like. And then he needs to figure out how to best meet the treatment goals for your father. It's not about trying to control the household from his office, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think even when I was younger, I was like, this is weird, because they were extremely close. I believe this man worked with our father for over 10 years, if I remember correctly, and went to him, about twice a week. It was court mandated as a part of his disability agreement, at least according to my father. So yeah, there's just so many instances. And, I feel that Alissa was really treated in such a way that it didn't enable her to have independence or make her own decisions. Even one thing that's brought up a lot by our father is something called the Ames test. It was a newer test that was implemented before you could get your high school diploma. And Alissa's class was undergoing testing. It wasn't a formal test. It was brand new. So they were just giving it to juniors, I believe, and seniors to see if they would even pass it, to kind of test this before it was implemented. But even then, he didn't even give her a chance to take it. He heard about it and fought for it immediately for her to not have to take it. So she never even, in my opinion, she never had a chance to even test her abilities. Every night after school, it was him doing homework with her. She was never just left to do it and see how she would do on her own. And I think that it really was a part of why she felt so down on herself all the time. And I think that, again, there's so many examples, but that's just the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect example, though, Sarah, because what you're illustrating there is that there's this hovering parent over her shoulder, never letting her independently figure out a math problem or diagramming a sentence or how to construct an essay. But so, she doesn't develop the facility to fail a little bit and then sort of recover from her failure and build mastery of any of those skills. Although I don't believe for a second that she had a learning disability, because nothing else in the life that you have described and her ability to work and her ability to function in other areas does not indicate a learning disability. But I will say this, that's a classic mark of a narcissist. If a test was going to completely prove that this young woman was high functioning and without any intellectual disabilities or cognitive disabilities, oh no, I can't let her take that test, because then she won't be able to be under my thumb anymore.
Right. As well as the school, because he had, possibly a school convinced, or other people can be the jig would be up at that point.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me, honestly. And he did fight for that diagnosis so hard. And for the record, I have not been able to find an actual diagnosis anywhere. There have been some rumors that that psychiatrist that I spoke about that brought us in and spoke to us was the one that diagnosed that. I've heard it's from a teacher, from a principal, but none of those are actual sources in which you would get that type of diagnosis. And she was, not on medication for it. I think, in my opinion, it was just a mental tactic to keep her down because she was extremely high functioning. To be honest, she had a better memory than I did. So it's really interesting that you say that. There are a few topics that I want to touch on too, and I don't know if it fits here in the conversation or if you'd rather address it later. But two things I really wanted to talk about as well was the fact that, our father was giving us pretty heavy prescription medication at young ages. And, as far as I can tell, throughout our entire lives. And then I also want to touch on, the contracts and see where that fits in the grand scheme of things. Of course, our father made her sign many contracts, and he stated that he learned this approach in a parenting class. So yeah, whichever you want to start with first, I would just love to get your thoughts. All right, guys, this is where I'm going to leave you for now, but come back for part 2 because there is so much more to talk about. And as always, thank you, I love you, and I'll talk to you next time. Voices for Justice is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Sarah Turney. If you want to learn more about Alissa's story and how you can help with the case, visit justiceforalissa.com. And if you love the show, it would really help if you gave me a rating and review in your podcast player. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you next time. All right, guys, you made it this far. Welcome to the secret after show moment we've created here. So, of course, I have to thank Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott. I don't want to give a full overview of this episode because this is only part 1. But I can say that I was really excited for this. Dr. Shiloh, Dr. Scott, and I have actually been working on programming around Alissa's case for a long time. It started back in November of 2019 when we were trying to put something together for an event, and that event fell through. And since then, we've been trying to plan something for CrimeCon, so hopefully that still happens. But it's given us a lot of time to go over what we kind of think about Alissa's case, and it's given them a lot of time to review the podcast. So I'm super excited for part 2. I'm super excited for this whole episode. But yeah, I think it's a really cool addition to these experts I'm having on. That's kind of the focus right now, of course, is getting experts in their field to talk about Alissa's case, which, to be honest, is a challenge. Because the case is up in the air, not everyone is really willing to comment on it. So I really appreciate, of course, Todd McComas, as well as Dr. Shiloh and Dr. Scott for coming on here and just discussing their feelings and personal thoughts about the case, as it is relevant to their experience. But I have a lot more in store for you guys, including, sneak peek, I actually talked to a medium. And I get it. If you are totally out right now and you're like, I don't do mediums, I don't believe in it, I don't care, I get it, and that's fine. You don't have to listen. I totally get it. But I am really open-minded to all of those things. And to be honest, I get asked about psychics and mediums all the time. So it just so happened that I was introduced to this medium who actually works with police departments, to help solve cold cases or help solve cases in general, I should say. So I'm super excited for you guys to hear that. I feel like it's not just a psychic/medium episode because he does have this relevant experience with law enforcement. I think it does lend some credibility there. So yeah, that's just a little sneak peek. I'm not going to say more because I could go on forever and ever and ever, but I'm really excited about these episodes. They're very different than the timeline episodes. They won't last forever, but there are a few more to come. But let's get into questions. So this time I have 2 questions from Miss Justine.
Hi, Sarah. My name is Justine, coming here from Idaho, and I have two wildly inappropriate questions. Hopefully you don't consider them to be. My first question is, it's a bit naive, but just out of curiosity, in the beginning stages when they finally decided to formally investigate this disappearance of Alissa, did they entertain her still being alive and being held captive? And if so, what were the steps that they took? What did they do? Secondly, so with the power of positive thinking, manifestation, once your dad is finally imprisoned with whatever charges come his way, do you see yourself taking the time to go and see him in prison, doing a visitation, and getting that satisfaction of finally seeing justice being served? If so, have you prepared what you would say to him? I love what you're doing. I have nothing but the utmost of respect and admiration for all the time and dedication that you've been putting into this for Alissa. I have a sister myself, and I would be doing the same fucking thing. So I'm going to continue supporting and sharing Alissa's story and doing whatever I can. Love you.
Hey, thank you so much, Justine. Thank you for your questions, and also you're awesome, and I appreciate you sharing Alissa's story. So, question number 1, did the police entertain the idea of Alissa being alive and being held captive? So this isn't something that I have discussed with them. This isn't something that I found in the case file. But the thing is, theories aren't going to be in the case file. They're also not going to share every single theory they have with family. So I imagine that thought had to have crossed their minds. I mean, my goodness, I feel like as a detective, almost any possibility would cross your mind. But I didn't find anything in there officially, so I don't know. Your second question about me visiting my father if he gets convicted, no, I would not go visit my father to speak my piece to him. And that's because if this does go to court, I will have the opportunity to do that if he's convicted. I believe the way that it works is if he's convicted, at the sentencing hearing, I believe I get to say something. Somewhere in this process, I get to say something if he's convicted. And that is definitely something I have thought about so much. And every time I think about what I want to say to him, I cry. Because to explain to him, oh my gosh, I'm going to cry right now. To explain to him how his actions have impacted my life. Specifically and especially if he gets convicted of Alissa's murder, to explain to him how him murdering Alissa has impacted my life. I could go on forever. I could make an entire new podcast about it. And there's so much I want to say. If it comes out that he's convicted of this and he's the man that took away my sister, I mean, my goodness, Alissa was my only mom. And to, on top of that, to let me live with the guilt that comes from her note, that line that says, Sarah, you wanted me gone, now you have it. If he had something to do with that runaway note, or even if, again, if he's convicted of murdering Alissa, for him to let me live with that is so cruel. So cruel. I mean, of course, the whole thing is cruel and awful, but there's so many specific things that, in my mind would be just so unnecessary for him to do. Why did I walk into her room first? Why did that note say what it did? Why pick that note? There's so much. How do you explain to someone how they've completely devastated and ruined your life? It's so hard. It's so hard. I think I would say all the things. I think I would take months and months probably to prepare my statement to him because, my goodness, I mean, to say that this has affected all areas of my life is an understatement. I have given up friends. I've given up significant others. I have given up my career. I have given up, my sanity at times, my health at times. I have given up everything to get justice for Alissa. And it's worth it. It's not something I regret. It's not something I have a grudge about, if you will. But yeah, to be able to look him in the eyes and say, you've affected my life in these ways, would be enough for me. That would be enough for me to do it in court. I don't think I would ever have the urge to revisit that with him, to go visit him in prison, to rehash that. I think, that's what justice looks like, right? It's a conviction in court will get Alissa her justice. And me being able to speak my piece to him in a setting where he is not allowed to interrupt me, he is not allowed to gaslight me, he is not allowed to speak back, would be justice for me too. So long story short, no, I hope I get to talk to him in court and then I never have to talk to him again. I haven't had a relationship with him in so many years, and I have no desire to have a relationship with him. And that won't change if this goes to court and he gets convicted. Absolutely not. But all of that being said, at this time, there are no case updates. I'm still just waiting for the state to make their decision, or the county, I should say. I keep saying state, you guys. It's the county prosecutor's office. So yeah, I'm just waiting every single day, checking to see if my father's been arrested. Because at this point, I don't even know how I would be contacted or notified. I don't know if the county attorney calls me. I don't know if the police call me. I would imagine, like other things in the past, I'd probably just hear about it on the news, which is why I check all the time. So yeah, that anxiety is still here and extremely crippling and awful, but there's no case update is the long story short of that. I am really rambling in this after show, so I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you enjoy these random ramblings from me where I kind of explore these topics. But yeah, as always, if you guys do have questions for the after show, please submit a voice memo to sarah@voicesforjusticepodcast.com. And I would love to answer your questions and have you be a part of our secret after show moment. But that's it. So thank you. I love you. I'll talk to you next time.